you, Mandy, Carrie, and Liz.
Just to let everybody know, we are recording this workshop today. So people who aren't able to join us can come back and view it later.
It's a special time of year, season to plant, love, so
we're going to get started here in just a few minutes at our yeast spread workshop. Welcome to everyone who could join us. Liz, we have started recording. So
okay.
Got about 3 minutes to go before our workshop begins. We're just waiting for some people to join in. My name is Kelly Strye, and I'm one of the 4-H Extension educators in Wright County. And this is Liz Pato. She is our virtual baking workshop presenter. Liz, thanks again for doing these workshops for us. It's been really fun for everyone.
It has been very fun for me also. Thank you. Thanks for thinking of me.
Well, with our face-to-face programming not able to happen until July 1st, we've had to become very creative in how we are creating these opportunities. So it's fun to see that this is working. Welcome to everyone to our yeast spread workshop. We're glad you could join us. If you have a few minutes to just please answer the questions on the poll on your screen, that would be great. And also, if you have any questions during our workshop today, you'll be able to type them in our chat box. If you're not familiar with where the chat box is, hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen and you'll see some choices there. And just click on chat and you'll be able to enter your question there. We'll get started here in a few minutes.
I used to be able to see how many people are on, Kelly. I can't see.
I can see on my screen. So far, I have 2 people that are here besides you and me.
Hope we get some more.
Well, we've got tough competition with the weather outside today, that's for sure.
That is true.
That's all right. That's why we're recording this, so we can watch it later if people aren't able to attend. So. I got some more people coming in. Hello, those of you who are joining us, and welcome to our yeast spread workshop. Thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here and learn about yeast spread baking. You could take a couple minutes and answer the poll questions that you see on your screen to tell us a little bit about yourself. We'd appreciate that. And also, you'll notice that your camera and your microphones are turned off. If you do have questions, which we encourage you to ask, you'll be able to type your question in the chat box. So if you're not familiar with that, is go to the bottom of your screen with your mouse and hover, and a menu that includes chat is located on your screen. So you'll be able to type your chat questions in there. We're gonna get started here in a few minutes. And Liz Pato is our presenter today. She is going to be teaching how to bake that yeast spread. Well, Liz, it is 2:02. Just so best interest of our guests, I think we should get started. Are you ready?
Good, I am.
All right, great. My name is Kelly Stry, and I am a 4-H extension educator in Wright County. And this is Liz Pato. She is our presenter today. Liz is a longtime baker, but also the open class superintendent of the Wright County Fair in the baking department. And Liz had taught a workshop for us this winter, but wanted to do more. And since you may or may not know that all extension programming, including 4-H events, are canceled until July 1st, we are coming up with new and exciting virtual learning opportunities. And Liz was kind enough to be our first presenter in these virtual experiences. And she's now very experienced because this is workshop number 3 for us. And I think we worked out all the kinks, right, Liz?
I hope so.
And she's going to be presenting today. So just one last time, if you do have questions as she's presenting, please type them in the chat box for us, which you can find by hovering your mouse over the bottom of your screen. And I'd be happy to answer them for you. And please ask away any question you like. So I'm going to turn my camera off, and I'm going to let Liz take it away. Thanks, Liz.
You're welcome. All right, welcome to bread baking. White bread 101, simple white bread. I have 2 loaves here that have raised. Let me just down a little bit so hopefully you can see them. They're not perfect on top, as you can see, but they're ready to go in the oven. This is actually probably what you don't want to do. See, I've got a bit of a line there and not perfect here. We're going to do some more. I've got some more raising that we're going to make into loaves, and I'll try to make those prettier. But I want to put these in the oven right now. They're going to go in at 350, and they're going to go in for 35 minutes. And hopefully they will be done by the time we are done with our demonstration so that you can see what the baked loaves look like. So give me just a moment, and I'm going to put these in the oven.
I am going to put the recipe link in the chat box for Liz's white bread that she's making today. So if you wanted to follow along or have that recipe for the future, you can have that there. So just give me a minute to do that.
All right, so my timer is set and my bread is in the oven. All right, so this is yeast bread. There are different types of yeast that can be used to make bread. There is a dry yeast, which most people are probably familiar with. There are 2 or 3 different types of dry yeast that you can purchase in the store. This platinum is probably the one that you're going to see most. And this platinum actually, the company actually put a couple of extra things in it. So it's not just yeast, it is, it's got some ascorbic acid, something else I can't pronounce, and some enzymes. Anyway, it just helps the rise. So this is the type I probably most use. If you have gone grocery shopping lately, you're probably going to notice that there isn't any, it's hard to find yeast. I actually looked in the grocery store this morning to see if I could find a couple of different kinds, and there weren't any. They did have the larger bags of yeast, which is just fine. And if you were to purchase one of those larger bags, they are better, it's a better value for your money to buy that, and you can freeze it. So once it's open, just put it in another container, Tupperware container, and keep it in your freezer. And I have used yeast up to, probably a year after I purchased it by keeping it in the freezer. The other type of yeast is really an old-fashioned yeast, and it's a fresh yeast. And it comes in a little cake like this, and it can be found usually in the dairy section. You would probably have to ask at the grocery store for it. One of these cakes is equal to 3 of these packages. So you would either have to use it all at once, or you would have to try to divide it so that you can, but it does keep in the fridge. So you can divide it and use it again and again. But not many people know about this. And so I think that this is probably the type of yeast you can probably find in the grocery stores right now, is a fresh yeast like that. So the first thing we're going to do is read our recipe from start to finish and make sure that you have all your ingredients on hand. And if you're working with young and you're working with your parents, please make sure that you're staying safe, that you're keeping hot liquids or your oven, or just make sure that you have help so that you're not hurting yourself or anybody. Okay, so this recipe calls for 2.5 cups of warm water. Now my water out of my tap is hot enough, but if you were to, if you didn't think it was warm enough, you can take a thermometer and check and see the temperature. Your temperature should be about 110 degrees. If it's much more than that, it will kill your yeast. Your yeast is a live organism, and the heat is what helps make it grow, but too hot of yeast will kill it. Taking a while for my yeast to heat up, my water to heat up here. So, and what I have is an instant read thermometer. There are, a regular thermometer would work also, a meat thermometer. So this is telling me it's about 114, which is probably just fine. 2 cups, and then I need another 1/2 cup. And this recipe that I'm making today, or that we have online, is for makes 2 loaves of bread. So then you're going to take your 2 packages of yeast, cut them open, and sprinkle them on top of the water. Then at this time, you can also add your sugar, 2 tablespoons. Sprinkle that on top. And the sugar actually helps the yeast to activate. And salt does the same thing. So we're also going to add our tablespoon of salt. Do not forget to put salt in your bread. Bread does not taste good at all without salt. I have forgotten. Actually, I forgot just once. And that's all it takes, just because it's all that hard work, and then lose your, have to throw it away because there's no flavor to it. And I just mix that up a little bit. And this is what it looks like. It's just a brown water, and we're going to let that sit for between 5 and 10 minutes. And I am going to cover it just to keep it warm. And we're going to let that bubble up. In the meantime, we're going to take my bread that is already risen and put it into our pan. So this bread right here has raised for about an hour now. This weather is actually perfect weather for baking bread. It probably actually even didn't take an hour. It probably has only been raising about 45 minutes, just because it's nice and warm. If you put your finger in it, you want it to come up just a little bit. But you can see it covered my bowl. You want it to double in size. So the bread that you put in there, you want it to double in size. So I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of flour on my board. We're going to take this out of the bowl and punch it down. Get all those air holes out of there. Okay, and then we're going to just cut it in half. This makes 2 loaves. A lot of times my loaves aren't very even, and that's okay. One of them could be a little bigger than the other. I'm going to set one aside. And I'm going to flatten this again. I'm just trying to flatten it, make it into a little bit of an oblong shape. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll with my hands. I'm making a nice roll. And then I'm going to tuck my ends in a little bit. And I'm going to roll a little bit more. And we want to try to keep it even all the way through. And I'm pinching what I'm finding is air bubbles, trying to get some air bubbles. And this is a lot nicer than the one I put in the oven. This is nice and flat on top. Everybody see that? And I have greased my bread pan, greased bottom and sides with Crisco. And I can just plop that right in there. And we're going to do the same thing with the other loaf. If your board or your counter is a little bit sticky, you can put a little bit more flour down. Okay, and then we're going to roll. Tuck our ends in a little bit. And roll a little bit more. Your bread dough isn't going to get tough, so it's okay if you, I mean, it does a little bit, but it shouldn't. You should be able to play with it a little bit. So if you want to play with it to make it real pretty, you can without harming the raise or the dough itself. This bread dough is not sticky at all, and it shouldn't be. If you're making a sweetbread doughs can be sticky because you don't want to put too much flour in them. You want them to kind of have a flakier consistency than a loaf of white bread. But a loaf of white bread, you want it to be, you don't want it sticky to the touch at all. It's not sticky at all. And into the pan it goes. And I'm going to cover these. And they should raise until they're a little bit up over the top of the pan. And that takes about a half an hour, or I'm sorry, an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. All right, let's take a look at our yeast. And it has bubbled up nicely. Not sure if you can see that, but there's kind of a foam on top of it. So that means my yeast is working. So for those of you that don't have a mixer, I use my mixer, and this is a dough hook. You would not use your regular hook that you would use for, this is the hook that you would use for making cookies or cakes or something. We're not using that one. We're using what's called a dough hook. For those of you that would make this by hand, we're going to put the ingredients in there. We're going to start putting the rest of the ingredients in there, and then you would just mix it with a wooden spoon or a spoon until you can't get any more flour in there. And then you're going to turn it out onto the board and knead it. And we're going to do that. I'm just going to put enough ingredients in here to get a little bit of a firm batter, and then we'll put it out here so I can show you how it should be kneaded. All right, so if you're following the recipe, we have our 2.5 cups of warm water in there with our 2 packages of yeast. We have our 2 tablespoons of sugar and our 1 tablespoon of salt. So we're going to add a 1/2 cup of dry milk powder. And that's just carnation instant milk. So we're putting a half a cup of that in, and that just gives it a nice rich flavor. And then this recipe wants a half a cup of oil. It does say canola oil, but vegetable oil is just fine. If you want your bread really rich, you could melt a stick of butter and put a half a cup of melted butter in here. Okay, then we're going to start adding our flour, and it says 8.5 to 9 cups. So we're going to put our flour in, and I'm not as careful with adding my flour or measuring my flour as I am with bread or pie crust, because we're just going to keep adding it until we feel that the bread has come together. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm probably going to start with 3 cups. And we're going to turn the mixer on and mix that in really well. I just want to show you what this consistency looks like right now, where we add some more flour. So you can see now it's still pretty wet, but kind of looks like paste. Okay. Okay, let's add another 2 cups of flour, so we're up to 5. So you could always put a tally on your recipe or someplace so you make sure that you're putting how much flour you've put in already, so you remember. Again, you can see how that is starting to come together. So it's a much thicker paste now. Okay, and I'm going to add a little bit more flour before I put it out onto my board.
Liz, is there any tricks to knowing when it's ready?
Yes, I will show you what it looks like. You mean when?
Right. How do you know you have enough flour added?
Okay, yep, I will show you that. Yes, definitely when it gets to the, yeah, there's definitely not enough flour yet. It needs to come together and not be as sticky. So once I add this cup, that's 6 cups, right? Hopefully somebody out there is counting with me, because I can't remember. I think it's 6. You might not be able to get 6 cups in before you have to start. Those of you that don't have a mixer, before you have to start using your hands. And it's okay to use your hands. That's the way I did it before I got a mixer. You're gonna get, your hands are gonna get all sticky, so make sure that you've washed your hands thoroughly before you start your process. And this is nice and sticky here, but it's not quite, I don't want to put it on my board because it's a little bit too sticky. So I'm going to take and add another cup of flour to it, which makes 7. And I'm going to get in there with my hands, and I'm going to push it down with my fist. And I'm kind of making turning motions with my fist to incorporate that flour into the bread dough, kneading it. I'm trying to work that flour off of the sides and into the dough. And I have a little bit of, you get a little bit of pieces like that, and you're gonna, that are flour, and you're gonna incorporate all of that into your bread dough. Okay, so I think I've got, so it's not quite sticky enough that I can put it out onto the breadboard. So I'm actually going to put not quite a cup of flour out on my breadboard. Quite a bit there though. Take this bread out. Try to scrape everything from my mixer. Okay, and then you're going to start folding. You're going to fold and push. Fold and push. And we're kneading. We're kneading flour into our bread dough. Okay, and as you can see, it's not sticky on my hands anymore. So I think with the flour on the board, I'm probably up to about 7.5 cups of flour. So, and we're probably going to be good with that. So I do feel that this recipe probably calls for a little bit too much flour. I don't think you quite need that much.
So Liz, somebody asked the question in the chat is, if I don't want to knead it by hand, can I use the dough hook to knead it?
Yes, if I want to show you this because there are some of you that don't have a mixer. But the 2 batches that I've made already today, both were made in the mixer without me having to knead them by hand at all. Yes, you use the dough hook the whole way. Yep, once it starts coming together, it'll actually look just like this in a nice ball on the end of your dough hook. So, and if you're going to knead by hand, you probably want to knead it for a good 5 minutes. You want to make it nice and smooth. And I don't know if you can see right now, but there's a lot of what I call it looks like little pockets, like I've got a craggly face or something. And I don't want that. I want it to be nice and smooth. I'm gonna keep doing this. And if you need more flour, put it on your board. But at this point, you don't need a lot of flour, just enough to keep it from sticking. So I'm turning it, like I said, I'm folding and I'm turning and pushing. Most kids like this part of it. You know, if you really want to, you can pretend you can go like this and pretend you're beating somebody up that you don't like. It's not going to hurt it at all. We're just Kneading is what helps. So flour has gluten in it. Gluten is what a lot of people can't have right now, but gluten is what you find in wheat, in the flour, and that's what helps make our bread. And by kneading, that helps activate that gluten. Now I used just regular flour today, which is just fine, self-rising flour. You don't need to use bread flour. Bread flour has a little bit of a higher gluten content. And so sometimes it can make a firmer bread, but it's definitely not necessary. We're getting there. That's why I like my mixer. It does all the hard work for you. But I also think it's good if you're a first-time bread maker to do it this way first so that you can actually feel with your hands what you think the bread should feel like and look like. So this is no longer sticky. It's no longer sticky. I can put my fingers into it and you can see it actually comes back up. It's bouncing back, so we won't like that. And again, I'm trying to make it smooth, which it's getting there. So to me, this is smoother than maybe even over here. That's what we want it to look like. Any more questions?
Make sure that you type your questions in the chat box if you have any. Liz, about how long does it take to knead that dough before it's ready?
About 5 minutes. And that's actually about the same time in the mixer, about 5 minutes. Maybe a little bit less, but. And again, 45 minutes to an hour. So this is going into a greased bowl. So I'm going to turn it over and put it into a greased bowl. And you can see how much of the bowl it takes up. And I know that this is going to be ready to put into pans when it gets just a little bit above my bowl, the top of my bowl. But I'm also going to put a little bit of Crisco. So my bowl is greased. And I'm actually going to grease that bread a little bit too. That way you don't get a hard crust on the dough when it comes time to start putting it into pans. And then again, this has to raise for 45 minutes to an hour. All right. So just to show you, these are the loaves that we just put into pans, and you can see they're raising nicely. So we've got about 9 minutes left before the other bread comes out of the oven. And these won't be quite ready to go into the oven then. They'll probably have to raise another 20 minutes or so. But those are about ready to go into the oven. Perfect. Okay. So the bread dough that I have raising right now is for white bread. You could make dinner rolls with it. You don't have to put it in loaf pans. You could make dinner rolls with it. You can even make a sweet roll with it. It's not a very sweet bread, but if you were to roll it out flat, put some cinnamon and sugar and butter in there, and then put it in a pan and bake it, you would have cinnamon rolls. So there's lots of different things that you can do with a basic white bread dough. Trying to think of what else we could make with it.
So Liz, you made white bread today. How, if you were making a different kind of bread, maybe a wheat bread or a multi-grain bread, how would your technique be different?
Okay, it isn't a whole lot different with the whole wheat bread. Most of the time, my whole wheat breads are made with half whole wheat flour and half white flour. They're not a full whole wheat loaf.
Could you turn the camera up to your face so we can see your,
sorry.
when you're talking?
There we go. Sorry. That better? Okay. So a whole wheat loaf, as I said, would just be about half and half whole wheat flour and half white flour. What I do for a whole wheat flour or a whole grain flour is when you've got your wet ingredients, your yeast and your water and everything in there, is I add my whole wheat flour or my whole grain flour or grains or whatever you're putting in there, and actually let that sit for maybe 20 minutes to help the water absorb into the flour and the grains. White flour is processed, but so I used to work for a flour mill, and I've seen flour made, and they take the kernel of wheat and it starts at the top of the building and goes to the bottom. So it starts at the top and it goes through machines that shake it. It's pretty much all it does is shake that piece of wheat. And then it goes to the next, it goes through sifters, and it goes down to the bottom, and it just shakes and shakes and shakes and shakes until it's very fine, and you end up with flour. You don't, when you're doing a whole wheat flour, they're not shaking it as much, and they're not taking the, there's another kernel in there. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a kernel in there that for whole wheat flour they don't take out, and so that gives it that darker color. But for white flour, it comes out. If you can, avoid buying bleached flour. You really don't need bleach. All they're doing is making it a pretty white, and you really don't need that. If you want to make something that's like a white cake, buy cake flour. Cake flour is bleached and it's pretty white, but bleach isn't good for you. You don't need it in your flour. So you definitely, purchase an unbleached wheat flour. But so by the time you get down to the end of the wheat mill, this is what regular flour looks like. If it is wheat flour, it's gonna be a little bit browner.
Does the wheat flour dough feel different than the white flour dough when you make it?
Yes, it can feel a little bit grainier. So this is actually a whole wheat flour from King Arthur. So you can see that can you see that?
No.
Okay, there, how is that?
Yeah,
so it's a little bit darker. This is King Arthur's white whole wheat flour though. So they've actually left that little grain in there, but they've pretty much put this through the whole process. So this is very fine. This is fine, just like a white flour. So I actually did make some whole wheat flour using this white whole wheat and nothing else. And it did come out as a very a denser flour or denser loaf of bread. The loaf of bread was, instead of raising nice like we saw up over the top, it barely raised to the top of the pan and was a lot heavier, but it tasted delicious. So I definitely recommend making whole wheat bread. Very seldom do I make just plain white bread unless I want it for something special or I'm making it for the fair or something. Usually I make a whole grain or a honey oatmeal bread is really easy to make. I'm just would tell you to follow the directions. Bread making, just like baking, is a science. You need to follow your directions and you need to follow your ingredients. All of them except possibly the flour. The flour is the only thing where if the recipe says between 8.5 and 9 cups, you may only need 8. you know, that you just have to try and see on your own how much flour you think the recipe needs. You can also take this white loaf that I just did and you could add something to it. You could add some chopped up onions, or you could add some olives, or you could add some cheese even, and mix that in. And any of those ingredients would go in when we're doing that final knead. When you're doing that final knead, you would put all those ingredients in there. Or you could roll it out. So you saw how I had it in a nice square, you know, trying to roll it out. You could make it a little bit bigger, and you could put some ingredients in there and then roll it up, and you would have a nice roll with something fun in the middle. So it's fun to experiment.
So you can make a cinnamon loaf like that, Liz, where you put the cinnamon sugar and then roll it up and bake it as a whole
certainly
loaf.
Could, instead of cutting making that roll like that and then cutting it in individual rolls, just leave it all together and put it in your pan and bake it as a cinnamon loaf. You're absolutely right. So makes wonderful toast.
Well, I'm going to just ask the question of our people who are participating. What other types of bread have you made? Go ahead and type your answer in the chat box so we know what kind of bread is out there. I had asked a question earlier what your favorite type of bread was, and someone said Amish white bread.
Oh, tell me what Amish white bread is.
Lacey's the one who answered that. Maybe she can type in the chat box.
I think I've probably made an Amish white bread, but it isn't that much different from a regular white bread.
Wait to see what she says here about her answer. And if any of the rest of you have made any kind of bread, go ahead and type that in the chat box so we can hear about what type of bakers you already are.
And I do like this simple white bread recipe that you have posted, Kelly, because I do like the milk powder in it and the little bit of sugar to make a little bit richer bread. But to make just a plain Italian bread, you would use the yeast, the water, salt, and flour. That's all you need to make bread.
Right.
You don't need the milk. You don't need the sugar. You don't need the oil. Just salt, flour, water, and yeast.
So Lacey said Amish white bread is a sweeter white bread.
Okay. All right, my oven timer is going off. Let's see if this bread is done here.
All right. Mary Grace, she also said that she made Day of the Dead bread.
Oh.
Mary Grace, tell us what that is. I'd be interested to know that.
Oh, look at how pretty these are, guys. Okay, now if you want to know if it's done before you take it out of the oven, before you take it out of the pans, I would take your thermometer, got an instant read, and I'm going to stick it in the side here. And I actually want it to read about 200, and this is not reading at 200 yet. Try that.
Liz, maybe you could just show us what they look like right now so people can idea.
I'm going to.
Okay, great. Thank you. I
am. So, okay, that one is, yeah, they're done. So between 190 and 210, you want them to, the inner temperature to be. But you also want to, if you tap them, I don't know if you can hear, but you want them to sound hollow. So you want it to sound hollow. So I'm sure my microphone isn't on, but this is sounding pretty good. You can also leave the bread just as it is on top, or you can take butter if you want a nice shiny top. We're just going to take a little bit of butter and put some butter on the top of them to make a nice shiny loaf.
Oh, Liz, you are making us hungry with those bread. That looks gorgeous.
I know, isn't that fun? It's so fun. It's so pretty.
Beautiful.
Here's
So Mary Grace said Day of the Dead bread has orange juice and fennel flavors in it.
Oh, yum. See, there's wonderful breads out there you can make. There's so many recipes. I probably own 20 bread cookbooks. So I love my bread recipes, and I love trying different things with bread. So, but it is a science, and it does take practice, just like the pie. If you were on for those pie, making pie crust, it takes practice.
What other questions you have for Liz as we are getting kind of to the end of our workshop here today? Go ahead and type those in the chat box. I'm also going to launch a poll question again about what your expectation about evaluation of our program today. So if you could take a chance to fill that out, we'd appreciate that. So Liz, what is your favorite bread to bake?
I like making sweet breads. So my favorite is probably a tea ring, which is usually a sweet bread, and then you roll it out and you put a filling in it and you make it into a circle.
That sounds good.
So a circle bread with so it's not a complete circle. There's an empty spot in the middle. Do you know what I mean? Looks like a tire, maybe.
A ring.
A ring. Yeah. Yep. They're called tea rings. So any kind of sweet bread. Jerry would probably tell you he loves caramel rolls.
Oh, those are good too. What about when you have been baking? Tell us about a failure in baking that you have had and how you learned from that.
Well, like I said, I've forgotten salt. There's a recipe that I make that my grandmother taught me, and it's called 3-day buns. And I start them usually on a Saturday afternoon at about 3 o'clock and put all the ingredients together. You let it raise, and then you punch it down, and you let it raise again. You punch it down and make it into buns, and those buns sit overnight and then you bake them the next day. I forgot the salt. Do you know how much? And it makes 5 dozen rolls. Do you know what a waste that is to have to throw away 5 dozen rolls because they have no flavor? So do not forget the salt. Read your ingredients from start to finish and reread them and make sure that you've added everything on that list before you put that batter away or put it to rise.
I think that making yeast bread can be intimidating, but the recipe that you showed us today looks very easy, and everyone should try it.
I think this one is easy. And as I said, I do have a lot of cookbooks. I started trying to make sourdough bread, which is delicious, but you have to have a sourdough starter, and so I do have one in my refrigerator. So those are kind of fun. But I've probably made breads that are whole grain breads and have a lot of different ingredients in them that haven't turned out at all. You know, you read a recipe and I try it, and then you're like, oh, why did they even put this recipe in this cookbook? Because it's not any good. But somebody else could make it and it would turn out wonderful. So, but a lot of times if it doesn't turn out the first time, I don't bother making it again. So I've definitely had failures. You know, I do bake for the county fair, and I like to bake almost all of the yeast bread categories, but a lot of times the stuff doesn't get entered because it doesn't taste good. And I've got a wonderful taster here at home with me, my husband Jerry, and he tells me if something isn't any good. He will tell me whether it's going to get a blue ribbon or no ribbon.
That's great. Yeah.
He's I call him spoiled because he gets to taste everything and check everything out. And he's, like I said, he's a very good judge. He knows what's good and what's not. So
that's great. So I don't have any other questions in the chat box. Do you have any other advice for our participants today about baking yeast bread?
Not really. I think we did well. I think your biggest thing is don't kill your yeast when you get started. So make sure that your water isn't too hot. And make sure you knead it enough.
All right, that sounds great. If there isn't any other questions, I think we're ready to wrap up. Liz, I just want to say thank you again for teaching us how to bake a yeast bread today, and also a pie and a quick bread previously. If you missed the quick bread or the pie baking workshop, you can find those recordings of those workshop on the Wright County 4-H Facebook page. You just need to search UM extension Wright County 4-H, and you'll find those recordings there. Or if you're having trouble, just send me an email and we'll be happy to find those. I'll send you those links directly too. So we're really glad that
if we do have a county fair this year and you do have 4-H entries, I'm over in the general exhibits on entry day. Come and say hi and tell me you watched me, and ask me any questions. If you're going to make something for 4-H or even for open class, come and talk to me.
I know they're always looking for entries open class, right, Liz?
We always, yes.
Yeah, and also open for adults and kids, not just
don't forget, you can enter an open class and 4-H.
That's right, exactly. As long as if you're making this recipe, you have 2 loaves, so you might as well enter one in 4-H and one in open class
That is correct.
So, all right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming and taking time on your Saturday to join us. Watch for more virtual learning opportunities coming up soon to a Zoom meeting close to you. So again, thanks again, everybody. Have a great afternoon.